everyone. Sorry for starting 20 minutes behind schedule. Our sincere apologies. My name is Rakiba Oloko, and I am the Executive Secretary of Lawyers in Energy Network. I'm going to be your host for this event. Um, First of all, let me use this opportunity to welcome you to the 2023 edition of the Lawyers in Energy International Conference and Awards. This year's conference theme is titled Economic Development and Sustainability of the African Energy Industry, Emerging Trends and Evolving Concepts, Regulation and Opportunities. But before we commence, before I invite the chairman of the network to give his welcome address, let me invite our distinguished guest on seat to come on the high table for the event. Let me invite Dr. Omar Farouq of the African Petroleum Producers Organization. Welcome, sir. Let me also invite to the high table Dr. Abel Nsa is representing Engineer Gbenga Komoafe in today's opening ceremony. Welcome, Doctor, sir. Okay. So, Mr. Etomi, Mr. Abel said that we should leave the seats in the middle for you to sit in between them, because this was meant to be your seat. So he said we should leave the middle seat for you to sit since you are joining us virtually. So to complete this panel is the chairman of the network in Lawyers in Energy. Unfortunately, he couldn't be with us physically in today's session, but he's joining us physically and he's going to be giving us the opening address. Welcome, Mr. Chairman, sir.
Thank you, Rakiba. I hope I'm very clear.
Yes, you're audible, sir.
Thank you very much. Let me join Rakiba to welcome every one of you to the sixth annual conference of the Lawyers in Network Conference. We are delighted to have you in our midst, and I must commend the yeoman's effort put in by Rakiba and her team year after year to ensure that we get very good quality presentation at these conferences. I want to, in particular, thank those who have reached out to the network by way of sponsorship to ensure we have a good outing. My particular thanks goes to those I can identify: EKDC, Campos Mentis, Alex Advocates. I believe the other one I saw is Platform or something. I also want to thank the regulator, our upstream regulator, for being here with us. We place so much priority in the interactions we have with the regulator, because if you look at the theme of the conference, which I'm sure displayed, emerging and evolving concepts, regulations and opportunities. No matter how well conceived laws may be, if they are not properly administered via a regulatory body that knows what to do, then those laws can become moribund. And in recent times, given the difficulty we're experiencing in our economy, so much emphasis is now being placed on how the economy can be diversified. And one of the key sectors that has been mentioned as being so instrumental to the diversification of this economy is the power sector. I'm not surprised that EKDC are part of this. But then you cannot discuss power in Nigeria without gas, because 70% of power comes from thermal plants, and their feedstock is gas. And there's a huge gas constraint in the industry. But many people do not understand that's perhaps the number one issue to address if you really want to get power equation right. So I'm particularly pleased that upstream regulator is here. And talking about the upstream regulator, I know that one of the things they want to do is to harness gas that's currently being flared for the purpose of diverting it for domestic use. Hopefully, that could generate up to 3,000 megawatts for the electricity industry. So there's so much to play for in this country. I need not add that we're going through very difficult times. All the numbers are very daunting. The debt profile is high. There's talk about removing subsidy, which I don't think we have any more options. I think we run out of options with that. With removal of subsidies in both the petroleum and power sectors, there will be attendant inflation. And with these things, there could be civil unrest. So how we can navigate ourselves through all this, because these are necessary sacrifices that need to be made so that we can get the economy back in shape. But that critical period between when the action is taken and when the effect begins to show is a critical time for us to be together as one people in a country purpose. And that's why I particularly urge that with the elections over, we should begin to have a change in a record so that we can get back to the art of nation building. Elections are not designed to be an end in themselves. They're supposed to be a peaceful means of ensuring power transfer from to the other. So we should now focus on the real deal. And the real deal here is economic prosperity for the average Nigerian. So regulation plays absolutely no question about that. It will be my delight to listen to what is on up today. And finally, let me thank the participants. Without you, we will not have any progress. Year in, year out, some of you have been very consistent in supporting network. We believe your time in the next 2 days will not be wasted. You will go back fully enriched in the things you will take away. And we believe that as many of you as we can get converted into this train of nation building, the better it will be for every one of us. Again, let me welcome you to the 2023 annual conference of the Lawyers in Energy Network, and do have a pleasant outing. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Itomi, for that wonderful address. We always appreciate you. You give your speech always, and your support to the network. We really appreciate you so much. Thank you, sir. Moving on, we are going to be introducing the special guest of honor of today's event in person of Dr. Omar Farouq Ibrahim. Dr. Omar Farouq Ibrahim holds a doctorate degree in political science from Rutgers University, New Brunswick, New Jersey, United States of America in 1998, and a master's degree from Bayero University, Kano, Nigeria in 1983. He also holds a bachelor degrees from Ahmadu Bello University, Zaria, Nigeria in 1980. Dr. Ibrahim assumed the position of African Petroleum Producers Organization as Secretary General on the 4th of January 2020. Until then, he was advisor on international energy relations to the Minister of State for Petroleum Resources of the Federal Republic of Nigeria. In that position, he represented Nigeria on the boards of several intergovernmental energy organizations. He was Nigeria's governor to the Vienna-based organization of the petroleum exporting countries, OPEC, from 1915 to 2000, from 2015 to 2020, and executive board member at the Doha-based gas Exporting Country Forum, GECF, 2015 to 2020. He was a member of that forum. At the same time, he coordinated Nigeria's affair at the International Energy Forum, IEF, and later the African Petroleum Producers Association, APA. Dr. Ibrahim was between the year 2010 and 2014 General Manager and later Group General Manager, Group Public Affairs Division at the Nigerian National Petroleum Corporation's NNPC. Before Dr. Farouq joined NNPC, he spent 7 years in February 2003 to December 2009 as head of the PR and Information Department and member of senior management at the OPEC Secretariat in Vienna. He was the executive editor of OPEC Energy Review and editor-in-chief of the OPEC Bulletin. Before he ventured into the oil industry in 2003, Dr. Ibrahim was in the media where he was at various times the managing director, chief executive officer of the Nigerian federal government-owned media house, the New Nigerian newspaper, between 1999 and 2003. He was also the chairman of the board of directors of New Pack Printing and Packaging Company Limited. Before coming to the New Nigeria, Dr. Farouq had spent 9 years in various positions at the Daily Times of Nigeria, ranging from being member of the editorial board to a columnist and an op-editor. He was also the general manager of Niger Park Press and as group controller of administration. Dr. Farouq joined Bayero University as a graduate assistant in the Department of Political Science in 1981 after his national service and rose to the rank of lecturer by the time he left academia for journalism in 1990. Dr. Farouq is like, I was taken after you because when I was also growing up, I first of all went to the media before I went to study law. So I'm following in your footsteps. Now I'm in the energy industry. So I'm just following you. Maybe in the next 10 years, I'll also be one secretary general of Apple. I've always been telling you to put me in Apple. So we welcome to you. We'll present to you Dr. Omar Farouq. He's going to be giving us his keynote address, sir. Dr. Farouq, sir.
The organizers of Leica 2023 for the invitation extended to the African Petroleum Producers Organization, APO, to be part of this important gathering of mostly legal luminaries in the oil and gas and now increasingly the more broad energy industry. The theme of this year's conference, Economic Development and the Sustainability of the African Energy Industry, Emerging and Evolving Concepts, Regulations and Opportunities, is as broad as it is timely. And going by the array of speakers lined up for the next 2 days, I'm confident that the conference will do justice to the theme. I should begin with a confession. Although I have had over 22 years of classroom education, from primary to tertiary, I am not, by what many in this audience, both here and virtual, will call a learned gentleman. In other words, I was a student of many disciplines, but law was not one of them. So whatever I say about law should be seen as the view of an unlearned gentleman, but those views you may wish to know are also the views of many unlearned gentlemen and ladies who make key policies and decisions that drive the continent's energy industry. Before I address the theme of this year's conference, permit me to say a bit about the organization that I represent, the African Petroleum Producers Organization, APO. Founded as the African Petroleum Producers Association in this very city of Lagos on 27th of January 1987 by 8 oil and gas producing African countries with the modest objective of providing a forum for fostering consultation and cooperation among African petroleum producing countries in the areas of development of hydrocarbon resources. The association underwent major reforms between 2015 and 2019 in response to the global paradigm shift from fossil fuels to renewable energies, euphemistically called the energy transition. The unanimous adoption of the reform program, which consisted of fundamental changes to the mission and vision of the association, as well as the organizational, policy, and key decision-making structures and processes, signaled the beginning of a break from the silo mentality that had characterized the relationship of many African countries. For the first time, APO member countries were ready to abandon their earlier position as a loose association of oil and gas producing countries, primarily for consultation on hydrocarbon matters, in favor of an organization that sees greater partnership, cooperation, and collaboration, not only in policy matters, but also in oil and gas operations as the solution to the imminent challenges that the global energy transition poses to their individual and collective interests, and by implication, the interests of the African continent. For the first time in the over 3 decades of history of the organization, a forum of the chief executive officers of APO NOCs was recognized in the structure of APO. I'm pleased to say that this forum of APO NOC CEOs has been the most active body of the organization, having met 4 times in the last 1 year. The forum has been hosted twice by Sonangol of Angola, once by the NNPC of Nigeria, and the last edition, held 3 weeks ago, was hosted by Sonatrach of Algeria. In addition, a long-term strategy committee was established to constantly review developments in the global energy industry and reshape APO's position in order to continue to be relevant in the scheme of things. In recognition of the critical role that energy and regulatory regimes play in the oil and gas value chain, a forum of members of member countries' legal experts has also been formed and shall soon be inaugurated. Meanwhile, membership of the organization grew from strength to strength. By the end of the reform in 2019, APO had grown from 8 to 15 member countries. Last year alone, 3 additional countries joined APO, making us 18 full members with 1 observer, the Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela. These developments are testimony to the increasing realization by African oil and gas producing and potential producing countries that the solution to the imminent challenges that the energy transition poses to the African oil and gas industry lies not in continuing to do more of what we've been doing since independence, admittedly with some minor adjustments, but in developing a different mindset, a mindset that critically questions the givens that we have grown to accept. For example, we are conditioned to believe that we cannot make much economic progress without attracting foreign capital. And so, our policymakers' focus at all times is how to make the environment more and more attractive to foreign investors. The premise of this argument is that investment capital is country blind and that it goes where the investment climate is most attractive. But how factual is this position? Is capital truly blind? Do Western capitalists have the freedom to invest in any environment that will give them the most profit? Certainly not. In short, other considerations matter even more than profit. The problem with accepting the logic that capital is country blind is that our policymakers become obsessed with what to do to create the enabling environment for foreign capital to come and develop our countries. And most of the measures taken to attract the foreign capital are taken at the expense of looking within our own countries for the means of development. In other words, that mindset further entrenches dependency syndrome. It is gratifying to note that there is an emerging consensus among key industry players that the way forward for the industry in Africa, especially in this era of energy transition, is through greater cooperation and collaboration in policy making, in technology and local content development, in project financing, and energy infrastructure development. We have come to the realization that no foreigner shall develop our continent for us. No one owes us any obligation to develop our continent for us. Ladies and gentlemen, let me now leave Apo for a moment and address the theme of this conference, which invites all actors, principally the learned ladies and gentlemen here, to reflect on the imminent challenges posed to the energy sector of the African continent, particularly the oil and gas industry, in order to propose innovative and courageous solutions and strategies to address the challenges of energy transition. Energy transition, IOC divestment, a lack of international finance and investment in the oil and gas industry, especially in Africa. I say especially decidedly because FIDs in oil and gas projects are still being taken elsewhere. And even in Africa, FIDs are taken, but only where the projects are targeted at meeting the needs of the investors. We are all aware of the rush by world leaders to many African countries last year in the wake of the Russia-Ukraine war, asking to revive oil and gas projects that these same countries had discouraged us from pursuing only a year earlier. Indeed, this conference is expected to come up with fresh legal insights into why the African energy industry, in particular oil and gas, is where it is today, nearly a century after Africa has started producing oil and gas. Where did we go wrong? The conference is expected to identify the legal and other constraints that have made our progress in mastering the industry from upstream to midstream and downstream, including funding and other regimes, so slow. It's important, I note, that the level of foreign dependence by upper member countries in the operations of the oil and gas industry varies significantly. Some countries have made appreciable progress, especially in industry skills, development and fabrication of small parts, and tools and project funding. The conference is further expected to identify opportunities that respond to the needs and special circumstances of our peoples and continent, and whose implementation can promote the sustainable development of Africa through sound and legitimate exploitation of all its energy resources without excluding any. Ladies and gentlemen, scholars of African hydrocarbon laws have observed that the very foundation of the laws and regulations that govern the hydrocarbon regimes of most African countries was flawed from the very beginning, as most of these countries were either under colonialism or were coming out of colonialism when they first discovered petroleum. The hydrocarbon laws were therefore enacted either by the outgoing colonial regimes or by the new independent governments with little or no expertise in the sector. What is obvious in all these laws is that the sovereign rights of the owners of the resources did not get as much attention as the protection of investment capital, which invariably came from outside. Admittedly, there have been reforms in most of the laws, but the fundamentals have not changed. To this day, most of our industry players believe that without foreign capital, the African oil and gas industry cannot survive. And because of this mindset, we are unable to think out of the box. This was what prevailed in the first 8 years of OPEC, where foreign oil companies virtually controlled the petroleum resources of the countries they were operating in. It was not until 1968 when OPEC adopted the 1962 United Nations resolution on the declaration of permanent sovereignty over natural resources that OPEC member countries were able to extricate themselves from the near total control by the oil majors. What is to be done to unshackle Africa, its people, and its resources from foreign control? And by foreign control, I do not mean control by the IOCs, lording it over the Africans in their own countries. No, I mean a mindset that sees the salvation of Africa coming from outside Africa, especially from the countries that have colonized and continue to dominate us. I mean the mindset that believes that the existing international order has room for Africa to break from the current state of underdevelopment. Why must Africa export oil and gas when it has the largest proportion of the world's population living in energy poverty? To come nearer home, why must Nigeria export oil and gas when our factories are daily shutting down because of lack of electricity? Patients are dying in our hospitals because of lack of electricity, and our productivity is a fraction of our potential because the energy to realize the full potentials are exported. Why must Africa be forced to sell its oil in US dollars, which are then deposited in foreign banks? The answers to these questions are easy to find. African elites, we live false lives. We are not prepared to make the necessary sacrifices today for a better tomorrow. We want to export crude oil and gas so that we could get the foreign exchange with which to live lives that are unsustainable if the people from whom we import those goods and services decide at any time and for any reason to embargo those goods and services to us. One of the biggest challenges of the industry in Africa is the cost of production. Our per barrel cost is among the highest in the world. Why is it so? Can our lawyers take it upon themselves to do a comparative study of hydrocarbon laws of African countries with those of other continents? Are we getting the best that we could get? What can be done by our lawyers to ensure that the cost of oil and gas operations in Africa are competitive? What can you do to ensure that the contracts that we sign protect our short, medium, and long-term interests as countries? What can you do to extricate us from the contracts that are patently unfair, mostly obtained through compromising our own people? What can you do about the behavior of some of your colleagues who believe that they are prepared to defend the highest bidder even when they know that their actions are destroying the national economy? there are many cases in various African courts that the state is losing because the officials entrusted by the state to protect its interests are compromised by the other parties. These are the issues we should be critically looking at. This noble profession needs to be sanitized. This is not a blanket condemnation of all lawyers, I must say. There are many that have devoted their time and energy to the cause of their countries and peoples, and we appreciate them. Now, returning to Apple, we believe that the energy transition is a blessing in disguise for Africa. For without the global paradigm shift away from fossil fuels, Apple would still have been a talk shop. We would have continued to look up to Europe and America and others to explore, produce, refine, and market our oil and gas. We will be looking up to them to finance our oil and gas projects and to continue to develop the technology of our industry. We will continue to look to outside Africa for markets for our oil and gas, even when 600 million Africans have no access to electricity, and some 900 million Africans have no access to any form of modern cooking technologies. What has energy transition done to Africa? I believe energy transition has jolted us from our slumber. 3 imminent challenges that the energy transition poses to Africa are the challenge of funding, the challenge of technology and expertise, as well as the challenge of markets. The imminent threat posed by energy transition to Africa has compelled us to seriously begin addressing these issues at Apple. Beginning with the funding, Apple is today working with the Afri-Exim Bank to establish Africa Energy Bank. Negotiations have reached advanced stage, and we shall soon be choosing the headquarters of the bank. This is in recognition of the fact that the people on whom Africa has depended for decades to finance its oil and gas projects have now decided to abandon us. But Africa cannot afford to abandon oil and gas in a hurry, even when we are not contesting the signs of climate change. On technology, as most of you are aware, some of the world's renowned centers of science, research, and innovation in oil and gas in Europe and America have started closing down their faculties of petroleum. Africa is not going to wait until its oil and gas operators cannot find an institution to attend. Working with the CEOs of our NOCs, a team from the Apple Secretariat recently undertook an assessment tour of the various oil and gas training, research, development, and innovation institutions in member countries with a view to identifying centers that can readily be designated and upgraded into regional centers of excellence in various sectors of the oil and gas industry. And I'm pleased to inform this audience that some African countries have gone very far in oil and gas technology development. On the final challenge, namely energy markets and infrastructure, Apple believes that the coming into effect of Africa Continental Free Trade Agreement is an excellent opportunity to work on developing cross-border and inter-regional energy infrastructure. Nigeria, Niger, and Algeria's work on the TSGP, the RAMCO, and the CAPS are all projects that will help in energy integration of our continent. The Central Africa Pipeline System project, for example, is unique in the sense that it is a comprehensive pipeline system carrying crude, products, and gas across 11 Central African and Southern African states with a population of nearly 200 million people, most of whom have no access to electricity nor any forms of modern energy. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, I urge this conference to remember that the world is changing very fast. The old order is giving way. Africa must use the opportunity of the emerging world order to define its position. We cannot continue looking up to others for our salvation. No one owes us a duty to help us grow. We have a responsibility to ourselves, to our children, and to generations unborn. We can't continue to look outside for support, not just to us, but also to our future generations. With this, I thank you very much for your kind attention, ladies and gentlemen.
Thank you, Dr. Farouq, for that wonderful address. It was really enriching. First of all, I want to align with you and support you that yes, Africa must define its position in the energy international space, and we cannot wait for others to make us feel relevant or dictate what we should do. Secondly, I would want to also commend HAPO for its increased membership of countries, members that are joining HAPO. It's nice to hear that HAPO started from a humble number of 3 and are now currently 8. Hopefully, and then as the year proceeds, we hope that more African countries join the African Petroleum Producers Organization, and we also grow to be a big giant like OPEC. We also need to support ourselves. Africa, we need to support one another. And I appreciate what HAPO is doing in the African energy industry. Also, I want to comment on what the Secretary General of HAPO said concerning African lawyers on the need to be proactive in the development of its continent, of the energy industry space. We lawyers, we have a whole lot to do to develop this, our African energy industry. It's not only for us to be greedy and be selfish to protect our interests, just all in the name to develop ourselves. We also need to always support what is right, to ensure that we are able to allow that industry to grow. If as lawyers, as the Secretary General has said, if we can do our own little part, I think it will go a long way in ensuring that we achieve what we need to achieve in the African energy industry. I would also like to commend the African Petroleum Organization for their initiative to establish the African Bank. I think it is something that is long overdue. One key thing in anything that we do is funding. Funding is very critical in making or marrying anything. So if we can ensure that we take care of the funding of the African energy industry, I'm very sure that the international community cannot impose their ideas or ideals on us. And African Petroleum Producers Organization taking this initiative to establish the African Bank, it's a laudable project. And I want to applaud the African Petroleum Organization Secretary General here that this is a very great initiative, and we pray to God to make this come to pass, and may He continue to strengthen you in the laudable project you've embarked on. Lastly, to comment on the Secretary General's speech, he also mentioned something about the education of African energy industry, that is the oil and gas, that there is a gap, a knowledge gap. Yes, universities have started closing those faculties. I am also I'm part of some of the people, I'm part of I was affected by that policy because I knew I wanted to study oil and gas, but I was told that I need to study energy. So you have more international universities closing those faculties. So it's actually a good thing to hear that the organization is working towards resuscitating this department to ensure that there is opportunities for people that want to study the oil and gas industry to do so, and to also develop that particular sector and not just close it up in terms of renewable, because we want to transit from fossil fuel to renewable energies. Secretary General, sir, there are so many questions I would want to ask, and I know that the audience would want to ask you questions, but I don't know whether you want us to take Dr. Abel, then after which we can now come back to go to the panel session. Okay, thank you, sir. Moving forward, I would like to introduce Dr. Abel, who is representing the Chief Executive Officer of the Upstream Petroleum Commission in person of Engineer Gbenga Komoafe. Before he commences, I would like to read a brief profile of who Engineer Gbenga Komoafe is, then also briefly introduce Dr. Abel. Since 2021, when Engineer Gbenga Komoafe was appointed as the Chief Executive Officer of the Upstream Petroleum Regulatory Commission, he has been taking gradual but steady steps towards reforming the Commission in line with his promise when he assumed office. The 58-year-old engineer from Ondo State has shown that he is a round peg in a round hole as he continues to take critical decisions to ensure that NUPRC's mandates are achieved. A fellow of Nigerian Society of Engineers, Council of Registered Engineers of Nigeria, and member of the Nigerian Bar Association, Engineer Gbenga Komoafe, my apologies, expertise as a seasoned engineer and lawyer has no doubt been instrumental in giving the regulatory body the needed impetus to achieve its mandate. So you see, Engineer Gbenga Komoafe is putting me on my toes. After I finished studying law, he went to study engineering. Can you imagine? So maybe after this program, I'll just go and enroll for engineering course, okay? So that, I don't know, maybe in the next time I might be the new latest engineer. I can't imagine after studying law, you now go and study engineering from afresh. Okay, after engineer, oh, that's a big feat. That's a lot. So he was Group General Manager, Special Duties at the Nigerian National Petroleum Corporation, Group General Manager, Crude Oil Marketing Division, and Executive Director, Commercial Pipelines and Petroleum Marketing Company, PPMC. In addition, he was General Manager, Operations, Petroleum Equalization Fund, PEF, General Manager, Operations of the Petroleum Products Pricing Regulatory Agency, PPPRA, among several others. Aside Engineer Gbenga Komoafe being an engineer, he has degrees in law, industrial and labor relations, and is a recipient of various awards. He is an expert in institutional process study and designs to curb revenue, leakages, and attainment of optimal national productivity. As Group General Manager, Crude Oil Marketing Division, he facilitated optimum revenue for the Nigerian Federation and performed transparently as acknowledged by the Nigerian Extractive Industries Transparencies Initiative 90 in its reports within the period he served in office. In the same vein, as Executive Director Commercial, between 2012 and March 2014, he initiated strategic sales and retail plans and coordinated implementation of achievement of set revenue targets from downstream supply and distribution of refined products petroleum products for nationwide consumption. At PEF, he initiated operations policies for effective petroleum products, supply and bridging to the inner part of the country and price equalization management nationwide, and pioneered successful implementation of electronic tracking of petroleum product distribution nationwide. Ladies and gentlemen, that is the impressive profile of Engineer Gbenga Komoafe, who is being ably represented today by Engineer Abel Nsa. Am I correct, sir? Wow, thank you. So, Engineer Abel is a director and head, National Oil and Gas Excellence Center, and he is also a fellow of the Nigerian Society of Engineers. Please welcome Engineer Abel.
Thank you very much. Thank you. I was at the University of Ibadan recently, and one of the professors said, you know, you learn every day. So they said, leaning on existing protocol. So just permit me to lean on existing protocol. Welcome, and thank you very much. I'll be representing Engineer Gbenga Komoafe, who's the Commission Chief Executive of the Upstream Petroleum Regulatory Commission. He's unavoidably absent, and he sends his regrets. He's tried as much as possible to reach us. And so he has an address which I'll relay to us. Thank you.
Hello, everybody in the room. Would appreciate it if you can come forward, please. Those at the back should kindly come forward. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Let's not run to the back. Let's just get to the front. Thank you. So it's my pleasure and honor to deliver this address at the Lawyers in Energy International Conference and Awards 2023 with the theme Economic Development and Sustainment of the African Energy Industry, Emerging and Evolving Concepts, Regulations and Opportunities. Let me start by appreciating Leica for always being a trailblazer in contemporary issues relating to the African energy industry. We also commend you for your tenacity and consistency in the support for the growth and sustainable development of the energy industry in Nigeria and Africa at large. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, this year's theme is a further demonstration of the urgent need and commitment to ensure that all industry stakeholders join hands and refocus our energy on the burning issues of energy transition, as the Secretary General of OPEC has highlighted, and the continued sustainment of African energy industry. Historically, oil in commercial quantities was discovered in Nigeria in 1956 at Oloibiri in the Niger Delta. After about half a century of exploration, the discovery was made by Shell BP, who at the time was the sole concessionaire. Nigeria joined the ranks of oil producers in 1958, when its first oil came on stream, producing about 5,100 barrels. After 1960, exploration rights in onshore and offshore areas adjoining the Niger Delta were extended to other foreign companies. In 1969, the Petroleum Act was made effective to provide for the exploration of petroleum from the territorial waters and the continental shelf of Nigeria, and to vest ownership of and all onshore and offshore petroleum resources derivable therefrom in the federal government and for all other matters incidental thereto. Nigeria joined OPEC in 1971 and established the Nigerian National Petroleum Corporation in 1977, a state-owned and controlled corporation, which became a major player in both the upstream and downstream sectors, pursuant to the Nigerian National Petroleum Act of 1977, the NNPC Act, which dissolved the Nigerian National Oil Corporation. The NNPC Act empowered NNPC to engage in all commercial activities relating to the petroleum industry and to enforce all regulatory measures relating to the general control of the petroleum sector through its Petroleum Inspectorate Department at that time. To separate regulatory roles from commercial activities, the Petroleum Inspectorate Department was made the Department of Petroleum Resources, DPR, and was placed under the Ministry of Petroleum Resources, and the Minister for Petroleum Resources conferred upon it powers of the minister under the Oil Pipeline Act, the Petroleum Act 1969, and other enactments that he may have deemed necessary, which allowed DPR to issue permits, licenses, leases for all activities connected with petroleum exploitation, refining, storage, transportation, and distribution thereof. The DPR also acted as an enforcement agency of the for provisions of the above-mentioned acts. Distinguished delegates, the commitments from the Paris Agreement of 2015 and the Conference of Parties, COP 2026 in Glasgow, where Africa actively participated, placed a demand on all of us to keep global temperature rise to within 1.5 to 2 degrees of pre-industrial levels. The implication of this for the upstream oil and gas industry in Africa are far-reaching. The need to decarbonize our oil and gas production facilities not only requires commitment, but entails that we have the right discourse on policy direction to guarantee energy security throughout the journey to our net zero target. Hence, the Leica has taken the right step in the right direction through conferences and lecture series like this, which aims to promote policy discourse, productive engagement, and comparative regulatory analysis in the energy transition discourse. This 2023 edition of Leica presents yet another opportunity for us to make invaluable contributions to this noble discourse. Ladies and gentlemen, though the global transition drive is geared towards moving the energy sector from fossil fuels to net zero carbon energies by adopting cleaner and renewable energies, being a developing country, which was actually highlighted by the Secretary General of Apple, being a developing country with an economy that is dependent on hydrocarbon resources to sustain revenue for its population, it is our belief that a gradual and more flexible approach would be required in achieving this net zero target. Hence, the adoption of natural gas as our energy transition fuel in Nigeria, which we have reserves in excess of 208 trillion cubic feet. This can easily be exploited and utilized while still maintaining the goals of the Paris Agreement and COP26, which is to achieve zero emissions by the year 2060. Distinguished stakeholders, to further ensure the realization of the net zero target, the Commission, in conjunction with stakeholders, are developing regulations and guidelines to help eliminate methane and fugitive emissions, as well as carbon capture, utilization, and storage during hydrocarbon production. This would ensure that there is little or no emissions into the atmosphere, while extremely low hydrocarbon products are produced for safe use. As the quest for cleaner energy and net zero carbon footprints garner momentum, the need for oil and gas producers in Africa to embrace the reality of energy transition and take strategic position to leverage on the opportunities presented by the unfolding era has become more pressing. However, recent events around the globe indicate that fossil fuels will continue to be a core part of the global energy mix well into the future, and even beyond the 2050 targets for achieving net zero set by many countries. The recent increase in the price of energy, mostly occasioned by the conflict between Russia and Ukraine, and the ensuing energy disruption, have reawakened the call for geopolitical energy security and sustainability. Given this outlook, it is evident that in meeting the growing energy demand in the short and medium term, the upstream oil and gas industry in Africa would need to carry out further exploration and development drilling to optimize reservoir extraction, drill into new targets, and employ technological advances to optimize production yields for appropriate energy mix in Africa. We at the Nigerian Upstream Petroleum Regulatory Commission, NUPRC, have steered our focus towards working with all stakeholders to ensure business investments in the oil and gas sector are adequately protected. We're striving to ensure that all bottlenecks associated with regulatory processes are eliminated or minimized to ensure seamless operations as we gradually roll out the key policy initiatives necessitated by the Petroleum Industry Act 2021, PIA 2021. As you may be aware, Nigeria has adopted gas as our transition fuel, while incorporating a phased-down approach in our energy transition quest geared towards paying greater attention to the development of untapped gas resources. This energy source with low carbon footprint will serve as a transition fuel in meeting our energy security as a nation. Fortunately, Nigeria is blessed with the huge gas reserves of about 208.62 trillion cubic feet. The future of Nigerian upstream oil and gas is promising, but requires the right legislative framework and a change in policy direction for maximum economic recovery and energy sustenance. We have present in this conference distinguished members of the legal profession and eminent policymakers who would be deliberating on scenarios available to this energy transition. We also have industry stakeholders and partners who will provide solutions on our energy transition from fossil fuels to cleaner energy while protecting the African energy industry. Accordingly, the recently enacted PIA 2021 in Nigeria has generous fiscal provisions aimed towards attracting investments, not just for oil development, but for harnessing the rich gas potentials of the nation, which is among the highest in the world. As we strive for investment in cleaner hydrocarbon development, without prejudice to maximum economic recovery strategies for development of oil resources, the Commission, as empowered by the PIA, has placed its focus on 4 cardinal areas for sustainable gas development. This includes gas reserves growth, optimized gas production, domestic gas utilization, as well as gas flare elimination. These are to help us achieve economic development and sustainment of the African energy industry while decarbonizing our oil and gas development. To reduce the carbon footprint and attain environmental sustainability, the Act mandates the Commission to promote healthy, safe, efficient, and effective conduct of petroleum operations in an environmentally sustainable manner, as Section 6D of the Act, and ensure strict compliant implementation of environmental policies, laws, and regulations for the petroleum upstream operations. The enactment of the PIA 2021 has indeed opened a new door to the Nigerian oil and gas industry with extensive provisions designed to ensure that oil and gas development and operations are conducted in an environmentally friendly condition, while opening doors for massive investment in the oil and gas industry, thus promoting economic development and sustainment of the African energy industry. Distinguished guests, the Commission, birthed by the Act, is empowered to regulate the technical and commercial activities of the Nigerian upstream petroleum industry in a manner that ensures gas as a transition fuel, sustainable hydrocarbon exploration, as well, and production at optimum cost, dealing with issues of environmental remediation, decommissioning and abandonment, and setting up host community development trusts. Just as you are aware, the Niger Delta is a matured basin. A few years ago, major offshore Europe had inside it decommissioning and abandonment. So this is a major issue that has been brought up by the PIA 2021. Fellow learned colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, since takeoff, the Commission is working diligently in developing necessary regulations aimed at giving meaning to the intent of the PIA to ensure fairness, equity, and justice. The Act provides under Section 216 that stakeholders' consultation forum be held before the finalization of the regulation. In compliance with this specific provision of the Act, the Commission indeed held various stakeholders' consultative fora before finalizing 6 priority regulations, comprising the Nigerian Upstream Host Communities Development Regulations, Nigerian Upstream Fees and Rent Regulations, Nigerian Royalty Regulations, Conversion and Renewal Regulations, Domestic Gas Delivery Obligation Regulations, and Licensing Round of Regulations. Currently, the Commission is reviewing several other regulations with stakeholders. These regulations include the Upstream Petroleum Safety Regulation, Upstream Petroleum Environmental Remediation and Fund Regulation, Upstream Decommissioning and Abandonment Regulation, Gas Flaring and Venting Prevention of Waste and Pollutions Regulation, and several other regulations for the industry. These regulations are geared at having a cleaner environment and discouraging gas flaring and encouraging gas as a transition fuel. These regulations can be accessed at the Commission's website at nuprc.gov.ng. These sweeping reforms are geared towards promoting energy transition and creating additional opportunities for new investments and higher revenues for both government and investors. Distinguished guests, it's noteworthy that the heightened demand for gas in the context of recent geopolitical crises as the Russia-Ukraine crisis, in the Russia-Ukraine crisis, and the clamor for cleaner energy have created an opportunity for us as a country and a continent to step up the monetization of over 200 TCF of gas in proven reserves and up to 600 trillion cubic feet of potential unproven reserves. This can indeed present an opportunity for increasing revenue leading to industrialization and economic growth, as stated earlier. Ladies and gentlemen, at this point, permit me to conclude this address by reiterating that energy transition discourse should revolve around implementation of fair, equitable, and sustainable energy mix that entrenches the spirit of principles of fairness and guarantees energy security. I believe that while we deliberate on global energy transition to renewable and sustainable energy, the discourse around the future of African energy industry must be balanced, considering the energy needs of developing economies and the rights of fossil fuel-rich countries to develop using their naturally endowed resources. Once more, I must thank Leica for the kind invitation to join in deliberations with this esteemed audience today. Be rest assured that the Commission will follow this conversation during this conference closely and will work to work closely with all our African partners and other partners across the globe to help the African energy industry achieve its economic potential, while we also strive to meet the net zero carbon targets. Thank you.
Thank you, Engineer Abel, for that beautiful presentation and address. We appreciate the Commission accepting our invitation to attend this event. We are humbled and honored. Thank you so much. I want to commend the Commission I want to commend the Commission's work over the years in regulating the industry well and helping us develop our hydrocarbon and our upstream sector, and also guiding us through this transitioning process in Nigeria. Thank you so much. Also, want to commend your the development of the guidelines that the Commission is embarking on to eliminate emission in the environment, to help us clean our environment and give us a cleaner place to stay. So once again, we thank you so much, Engineer Abel, and help us send our appreciation to Engineer Komoafe for sending you to represent him, even when he was very busy to attend in person. I knew he was really pained, because as at this time last week, he was still telling me that he'll be here physically. But I know, due to the nature of his work, and I understand that he couldn't make it today. So we appreciate him, and we also appreciate you very much for accepting to represent him at this occasion. So we've come to the end of the keynote address. Before we conclude this panel, we would like to ask the two speakers just a few questions. I don't know if the general audience have questions to ask, but I know I do have a lot of questions to ask from my own hand here. And I was just waiting for them to finish, because this is actually the platform where we can engage them and ask them some of the things that are burning our mind. So I'm going to start with His Excellency Dr. Farouq Omar, who is the Secretary General of African Petroleum Producers Organization. And the first question I want to ask you will be, the world has embarked on a journey to net zero. Do you think net zero emissions will be achievable in Africa with the current rate of fossil fuel based on projects going throughout the continent? Do you think we can achieve that net zero the world has embarked on, that journey? And if you do, when do you think it will be feasible? Please, can we have a mic on the eye table, please? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Rakiba. I've been asked this question several times. First, I want to make it abundantly clear that Apple, as an organization, is not against energy transition, nor is it questioning the science of climate change. Even though personally, as Omar Farouq, I have my reservations about the justifications about climate change. But I represent an organization, and the position of the organization is that we are not contesting the science of climate change. When you ask whether Africa is ready or is going to meet the target of 2050 or even 2060, as the president of Nigeria said for Nigeria, honestly, I think Africa, we should be very careful when we go out or even within to make statements that appear voluntary, but at the end of the day becomes very binding to you. In 2015, our countries went to Paris and signed the climate agreement. In retrospect, when they came back and realized the gravity of what they signed, we ask, did they go and sign because they didn't know, or they went and signed these things because they were under pressure from some powerful countries, or they went and signed because they seriously believed that, yes, the world needed to be saved from climate change and the environmental challenges arising from emissions? It's difficult to tell for each head of state that went there, whether he went there because he sincerely believed that the world needed to be saved, or he went because he didn't understand, or he went because he was forced to go by the powers that be. As far as we are concerned in NAPO, and this is becoming the African position, we did not create the challenges or the problems of energy transition. That's number one. Number two, what we are being told in the last 50 years, from the last quarter of the last century to date, about climate change, energy, environmental degradation as a result, that burning fossil fuels are responsible for this. Ladies and gentlemen, this is not a new science. As far as we know, studies in Europe had shown that as far back as 1850s and 1890s, their own scientists had established that burning fossil fuels emit greenhouse gases, and these greenhouse gases affect the atmosphere. But these same countries decided to hide that study because they needed that energy to do their industrialization. They needed that energy to industrialize their economies, to make the living standard of their people better, and they succeeded. Today, and I have argued this elsewhere, that today's energy transition challenge, or the quest for will not have become an issue if two things didn't happen. The first is globalization. But the more important one is the Arab oil embargo on America and some European countries as a result of the 1973 Arab-Israeli conflict. For over 150 years, Europe and America were consuming oil without stop. They had finished their own oil and they were getting from Europe, from Asia and Africa and other places. They had become so 100% dependent on it, only for them to realize at the end of the day that those who had that oil could sanction them, could embargo it, and they did it. And for the first time, they realized it's a question of energy security. As far as personally, my position is, climate change issues are issues of energy security. If Europe and America were the ones that are endowed with the resources that Africa and Asia has in oil and gas, believe me, the technology for making oil and gas environmentally friendly would have been created. It exists. It needs to be perfected. But if they perfect it, they are going to continue to be dependent on countries that they don't trust for energy. And energy is life. So I think we should stop deceiving ourselves into thinking that these are just, let's face it, last year when the Ukraine-Russia war started, the very countries that told us not to spend money on oil and gas exploration and production were the ones that were rushing to Africa. They came to Nigeria, they came to Angola, they went to Angola, they came saying that we will bring the money for you to produce more oil and gas. But you're going to produce it for us, not for your people. So, Madam Rakiba, I think in Africa we have to learn to be a lot more critical when we look at global issues. There are so many issues that should be on the global agenda that will be in the best interest of the vast majority of the world population, but they are not brought on the agenda. Anything that interests a small population of the powerful countries, it becomes the dominant agenda. And unfortunately for us, our elites in particular, we just regurgitate it and we take it and we keep as if we are the ones that innovated it. No. And they have ways of doing this. One of the ways they do is, today in Nigeria, and just like in many African countries, there are so many NGOs. Seriously speaking, if you ask, go and do an audit of Nigerian NGOs, 80% or more are funded from outside. I think it's enough. Thank you.
You are very correct, sir. And I think it still brings us back to the funding issues of that we're talking about. So yes, I know we have some Africans, especially the youth, that have good and creative reasoning of wanting to do, but when they are incapacitated by funds, they don't have any choice but to bend to the people that will pay their price, you know. Before I come, there's a follow-up question, but I don't know whether I should ask that question. I should go to Mr. Abel. Maybe I should quickly ask the question. So you mentioned that, sorry, back to Dr. Farouq, sir. So you mentioned that if the international world that says the big guys were the ones that have this raw materials that African has, they won't be shouting about this energy transition and these renewables, and that they would have created a technology that would have made this oil and gas industry environmentally friendly. My question now is, since we now know that this is the problem, what is we Africans, mostly Apple, doing to ensure that now Africans can create this technology to make oil and gas environmentally friendly? I think if we are able to do that, then the discussion of moving away and protecting our environments would reduce, and they will not be able to sway our mindset.
I think the challenge really has to do with our mindset. Most of our people, including not even the elite, the people in the village who don't, we have been conditioned to believe that the West is the model we should all emulate. We want to see the way I'm dressed.
Yeah.
We want, yes. You want to wear Tommy Hilfiger, you want to wear, and so on and so forth. And this is what accounts for what I said about the challenge of our elites. We are told that the oil industry in Africa doesn't have the means to fund itself. We have, therefore, to create the enabling environment for people from outside to come and invest in Africa. If not, the industry will collapse. I don't believe so. I have always argued that we have the means. We only need to prioritize. And I always give examples. Ladies and gentlemen, I had worked in the OPEC Secretariat for 7 years. When I went to OPEC in 2003, oil prices was between $22 and $28. If the price of oil goes below $22 for 10 days, OPEC will cut production by 500,000 barrels in order to make sure that the price goes within that bracket. If it exceeds $28 per barrel for 10 days, OPEC will increase production of 500,000 per day in order to bring the price down. This was up to 2003. From 2003, the price of oil began to go up. 28, 30. I remember vividly. I was head of PR and Information Department in OPEC in 2004. We had 5 extraordinary sessions of the Ministerial Council because the oil price was going up every week. By 2008, oil price was $140-something per barrel from 20-something. And global oil production was also rising. It wasn't like the price was going down. In Nigeria, in 2005, Nigeria produced crude oil alone, not condensate, 2.5 million barrels. Now, yes, per day, 2.5 million barrels per day in 2005. Ladies and gentlemen, and this is also what happened in most other oil-producing countries. Because I think oil production, global production was 82 million barrels per day at that time. By 2008, it was almost 90 million barrels. So every country was able to increase its production. And the price was from 22 on the average to 140. Ladies and gentlemen, if we believe sincerely that our economy is highly dependent on oil and gas, why didn't we put a fraction of that excess money, that windfall, on developing the oil and gas industry, so that our own people will be able to do what the IOCs are doing? Why didn't we invest part of that money as a fund for the oil and gas industry? Why didn't we use part of that money to create the infrastructure that will allow us to be able to get oil and gas across the whole of Nigeria, so that every single person, even in the village, can have a cottage industry? When you are able to do this, when you energize the people, you'll find that oil will not be the mainstay of your economy anymore. We didn't do that. And I'm not talking about Nigeria. I'm talking about most oil producing countries, except those in the Middle East. Saudi Arabia, UAE, Qatar, Kuwait, go and see it. They really put their money there. And that is why today UAE can tell you we are for energy transition. They make money from oil, but they can do without that money. Saudi Arabia is also moving. They are the ones producing 10 million barrels a day today. We are struggling to produce 1.5 million barrels. Yet, they can tell you that, look, to hell, if we have to, we can abandon it. We can still go on with our lives. We cannot afford to do that. Now, we have to control our appetite for foreign goods and services. We are interested in selling oil and gas because it gives us immediate comfort, immediate convenience. We want to use that money. The moment you hear that Nigeria's or Africa's reserves have gone down, everybody's screaming. Reserves don't have fundamentally anything to do with what you do in your basics of life. Your feeding, your clothing, etc. But because our lifestyle is so patterned, you want to go to Europe for every 3 weeks for holiday. You want to do so many things. I think this is our problem. We realize this and we are working on it. And that is why today, Apple and Afri-Exim Bank are working towards establishing the Africa Energy Bank. I can tell you that all the national oil companies of Apple member countries are with us on this. They are ready to invest in it because whether they like it or not, these Europeans that have been putting their money in our oil and gas industry will leave us as soon as they have an alternative. They are not investing because they like us. They are investing because they need that oil. And the day they don't need it, we are not going to be able to have them come here. So we are working to ensure that we have our own means of supporting this industry. As for the markets, I've said this 1,000 times. Africa has 1.4 billion people. 900 million of them do not have access to modern energy. 600 million Africans do not have access to electricity. Ladies and gentlemen, believe me, the market is there. What you need to do is to develop that market. Once you are able to energize these people, I don't know how many of you have read the book by Leica, From Third World to First World. How he transformed Singapore in a short time. The same problems we have today is what he had. But he decided that the first thing to do is to energize his people, so that every cottage, every house. I lived and worked in Vienna. Let me tell you something. Many Nigerians go to Vienna, Austria, to buy lace. What you don't understand is that there isn't a factory, big factory in Austria producing lace. They do those beautiful laces in the basements of their homes. So, because there is energy, every home is producing. Here, we don't do that. We sell the energy outside and our people are still suffering. So, as lawyers, please do what you can review the laws, challenge them, so that we will be able to benefit from what God has endowed us with, and if necessary, fight those with vested interests in keeping us where we are, because that is the only way we can get our to people like us. Maybe we are on the other side of the, but for our children and generations to come, we owe them a duty to work towards this.
Thank you, sir. So that takes me to my next question, and that's for Mr. Abel. Obviously, we should review our laws. So my question is to you, sir. Our current laws and policies, do you think they are sufficient enough to guide us through this process, or we need to work on them?
No. First of all, when you're talking about the law, two major things you have to look at is the Petroleum Act of 1969 and the PIA. Let's start from this. The OGIC started in 2001. So it took us about 21 years to come out with the PIA 2021.
Congratulations for that.
That's relatively pathetic, because as the law came out with all the beautiful fiscal provisions inside it to kickstart and just energize investments in oil and gas, immediately that came out, the global space told you that energy, just like Doctor said, energy transition is at your doorstep. So we had two major transitions. While we're transitioning legally, with the policies that came as well with the PIA, now we had those beautiful fiscal provisions in the law to increase production. But the whole world tells you you cannot do it. I remember very well, just like what he said in 2008, there was a summer day that the oil price rose all the way. I think it was 145 or so, and it came down a little bit. I remember that map, that graph very well. So 2008 was actually a was a year for milestone decisions, what you might call that. So what we are seeing now is there's a transition, legal transition, whatever you want to call it, legislative transition with respect to the Petroleum Act, the Petroleum Industry Act of 2021. So that duration that took us all that long is a challenge. The energy transition is a challenge. You'll also see that we will not be able to run away from energy transition, as you're seeing. But also developing Nigeria, and one of the ways you can really do that is through gas. I highlighted that during the speech of the chief executive. It's gas. Sit down and think that when you flare 1 million standard cubic feet of gas, and if you put that into a combined cycle gas turbine, you've lost about 3.7 to close to 4 megawatts of electricity. And you've lost that forever. So number one, we cannot afford to flare. There's no doubt about it. Its negative effects on the environment, lack of issues of, he spoke about moribund industries and factories and so on. One of the ways to go around that is gas. And I basically itemized a few things that we've cataloged to address gas flaring issues. You cannot, I sat in a meeting somewhere outside, somewhere in Calgary, and in the conference, we're talking about a gas project for Shell. That's about 15 years ago or so. And at the round table, somebody said, oh, what are they going to do with the gas? Another person mockingly at the end there said, hey, they flare it. And so he painted a picture that when you pick up $10,000, you light a match and put into that money, and it just goes, burns. So that's what you're doing. So you had somewhere, and you were just throwing $10,000 into it. So that's number one, we cannot afford to flare. I itemized, cataloged 4 things. We need to increase gas reserves, and so there are things to work around that. They are entrenched in the PIA. How are we going to go about it? It's now the complete use of the PIA. We need to optimize production. Production cost has got to come down. We need to I spoke about the gas flare. One of the things the president actually did was the signing of the 2018 waste gas and pollution regulation of 2018. It completely changed the scenario. Prior to this, you could see a producing company paying 10 naira per 1,000 standard cubic feet of gas. That you cannot. So all I do is I flare the gas and I sign you a check at the end of the month or whatever it was. But if I tell you that if you're a marginal field and you produce less than 10,000 barrels a day, you're paying me 50 cents per 1,000 standard cubic feet of gas you flare. Similarly, if that acreage brings in more than 10,000 barrels of oil a day, remember this is associated gas, comes in with more than 10,000 barrels a day, you're going to pay me $2 per 1,000 standard cubic feet. That single piece of legislation revolutionized the oil and gas industry and the gas side of things. And when we sat before the Senate committee a few years ago, and that you could clearly paint that picture, we cannot afford to flare gas. Gas will do you a lot of things. Just as you could say C1 to C5. C1, which is your methane, categorically can give you. He kept speaking. As he spoke, I smiled in some cases. LNG, yes. Conventionally, LNG is, oh, look, it gives you about 1/600 is original volume when you get LNG. And it's in a liquid form. So you move it over there. So there's a World Bank map that you always see. When it exceeds 2,000 kilometers or more, you're better off with LNG because of the maintenance cost of the pipeline and so on. One of the challenges we have is also the dearth of infrastructure. So the gas is stranded. So connectivity issues to those things is a major challenge. So how do we do that? We'll have to do it through virtual pipelines, CNG or LNG. You can indeed, and we're beginning to utilize LNG in country. Because if I need to industrialize, let me paint a picture for you. If I need to industrialize the north, for instance, which has to come in, because you see he spoke about factories closing down, and these are real issues. So if I pick up, for CNG, if I exceed 200 or 200, about a threshold of about 180 to 200 kilometers for distance-wise, it's not going to be profitable for me to use CNG. And you can see the trucks around. Most of those trucks carry about 8,000 cubic meters. The other ones that could give you up to about 15,000 cubic meters are what they use, I think, carbon fiber technology. That's more expensive. Years ago, they came in with all sorts of things to do, but no. There has to be technology. There has to be revolutionary means of doing these things. So yes, I can move gas with mini LNG in country, and you're going to see that soon. I can move gas, and because the major three value chain in LNG is liquefaction, shipping, and regasification. So in shipping case will now be the trucking. So I have a regasifier at, say, a power plant or an industrial, whatever, or a textile factory. He spoke about textile industries. You can see what has happened about those textile companies in Kaduna closing down. That can easily be reactivated. You will need energy transition, as he spoke. We just contribute about slightly above 3% of the whole global pollution from fossil fuels in Africa. That's the whole of Africa. But remember, when I spoke about there has to be a balance, we will not be able to run away from energy transition, especially on the transportation side of things for Europe and the developed world. You stand at an airport and a car drives close to you and you just won't see exhaust pipe in the whole thing. So energy transition is gradually coming in. For the transport sector, the engineers had a conference recently, and it all came up extensively on energy transition. Yes, adoption of gas as a transition fuel is important because, yeah, it's fossil fuel still, but the energy content is lower. Similarly, other sources of I wouldn't just move gas from here to there because I have infrastructure. I don't have infrastructure. I've got to look at revolutionary ways like virtual pipeline, moving moving trucking, CNG. When it exceeds that, you can go mini LNG. And Greenville is doing that. A few other ones will soon join, so that we can filter gas all over. Because gas you can use for heating, and you can strip it, and by the time you strip the C3, C4, which is your LPG, that can use for cooking. Then your C1 has so many things it can do as gas-based industries, your fertilizers and the rest of them. So indeed, where we are capturing these things and where we are tweaking it is in the gas sector. And we've done extensively well. We're still working on that as well, because you can't run away from industrializing Nigeria. And he kept using the keyword there, production. We can't run away from producing in garages, in so on. But power is a major challenge. And remember, you can use that C1 to generate power. You can use C1 fertilizers and so on. So yes, a lot is being done, as well as on an environmental side of things as well. I've cataloged how many regulations we've turned out so far. I mentioned offshore Europe recently, not too long ago. I was saying in the North Sea, a matured field, the whole conference was on decommissioning and abandonment. We've also taken that into consideration. There's also host community trust, of which some of your lawyers put together a lot of things in putting together the PIA. Yes, so that's also limited pollution in the environment. But so we're working on the pollution side of things, on a community, as well as gas generation. So lots is going on, and we're working on it. So I think that would be my simple answer. Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir. And we appreciate your immense work and effort, and it's really showing in the industry. So you've answered my follow-up questions and my follow-up questions and my follow-up questions. So I was just nodding my head when you were answering the questions. Before we conclude the session, I want to give the audience 2 slots to ask questions. I don't know if we have anybody from the virtual audience that are willing to ask questions, but let's have someone from the in-house delegates. I don't know, do we have anybody that has 1 or 2 questions to ask our panelists before we round off today's session? Do we have anybody from the virtual audience signifying interest? Okay, so I believe we've come to the end of this panel session, and I want to use this opportunity to thank our distinguished personality who came in for this event. Dr. Omar had to fly in from the Republic of Congo yesterday just to attend this conference. And we want to say a big thank you to His Excellency for granting our invitation and accepting to join us physically today. We also want to say a big thank you to Dr. Abel for also being here today. I want to call on one of the trustees of the network. She's hiding at the back of the conference. She didn't want anybody to know that she's inside the room. Please permit me to invite on stage Mrs. Abie Tam George to come and present the plaque for our invited guests.
Ladies and gentlemen, I stepped in quite late, but I want to, on behalf of the trustees, thank everyone who is here for this very impactful conference. We say thank you and welcome. To our distinguished speakers, we can't thank you enough. We know how difficult it is to come in here to make this very educative presentation. For the short time that I came in, I can see that it was quite extensive, touching on almost every areas that we needed to recalibrate, we needed to rethink and see how we can do things differently for the energy sector. We say thank you so very much. on behalf of Lawyers in Energy Network. This is an award, a token of how we appreciate you, how we're very thankful for all that you do for this association and coming forward to make this very impactful presentation. We say thank you to you. Thank you. We're so grateful, Dr. Umar Farouq. This is a very interesting time. We can't honor you enough or appreciate you because of the time that you had taken, the commitment that you have shown to be here today. It is indeed an honor to us. And I think for all the participants as well, that you're here today to give us a knowledgeable insight, an informed insight in this sector. We say thank you. A token of award to you, to appreciate you for what you continue to do. Thank you so much.